wall here. I am so sorry we've run out of chairs. I don't know if you've ever had this happen before. There's got to be, about 75 chairs in here, and we've filled them all. So, but whether you're standing or sitting, welcome to the Grand Prairie Museum. So happy you could come here today to hear about Danny Rycroft. My name is Charles Taz. I'm the curator here at the museum. I'm just going to do a little housekeeping things before I hand it over to our MC, Pat Waremouth. So those of you that might not be familiar with the museum, the washrooms are right outside these doors, right across the hall. And should the fire alarm go off, depending where you are in the room, you can exit out the exit doors here, or exit out here and go out the front. And we're going to meet at the cement pillar on the other side of the footbridge, in the unlikely event that happens. There is a break in the presentation. There is food and refreshment here. You're welcome to enjoy that here in this room or in the lobby, but please not in the gallery. You are welcome to visit the gallery, but please don't bring food or drink in there. We do allow bottled water, but that's about it. But if you do get a chance to go in the gallery, the military section, along the back wall there, we've added a new display on German POWs here in Alberta. So it might be something you haven't seen before. All right, without further ado, our Master of Ceremonies, Pat Waremouth.
Well, thank you, and welcome to all of you to the Peace Country Historical Society's Remembrance Week presentation. We're a society that promotes the learning and appreciation of the Peace Country history through events like this, presentations and tours. Any of you are interested, I think there's some brochures up at the front table where you walked in. Now the PCHS's Remembrance Week presentations have kind of become a tradition. We've talked about a stretcher bearer in World War I, a chaplain in World War II, and these have been done by a man which I suspect many of you know, Duff Crear, military historian and an instructor at the college for many, many years. He couldn't make it today, and he sends his greetings and apologies. So I guess how this presentation will be or go is, Charles has already mentioned a break. I am going to talk for a while, probably I'm going to try and hold it to 40 minutes, although there's a lot of information to go through. I'm then going to invite, there's going to be a break. You're welcome, as Charles said, to the refreshments. Please help yourself. And then Greg Rycroft will do the next part and then turn it over to some family members to do other things, including showing you some of the stuff up on these tables. Before we start, I'd like to, well, first of all, I'll tell you that behind those people over there, there's a door prize. Please sign up. It's a nice bag with poppies imprinted on it, and you can have a chance to win it. I'd like to recognize some of the groups that I know are in this audience, and I might as well start off with and we don't have time to introduce people by name, so I just ask if you'd hold your hands up, at least people would get an idea of who's here. Now I know there's a few Rycrofts. I wonder if I might ask that you hold your hands up. Okay, thank you. And the next people I wanted to introduce were Legion members. How many are here? Okay, great to see you. The next ones would be the local politicians, the people that run the municipal governments, county councils, city councils, and serve your community in that capacity. I would ask that you raise your hands. Not to make you targets, just to recognize you. Thank you. And the press. I know there should be at least one, the press here. Did he show up? Perhaps not. Maybe he'll be here later. Anyway, the last two things I'd like to do is to acknowledge that today, November 8th, is National Indigenous Remembrance Day. And they would have had their ceremony this morning, I believe. This day was set up in 1994 by the federal government, and it was to recognize their distinct contributions, the Indigenous people. And then I'd like to just recognize the time of year, and I don't think I have to remind anybody in this crowd, but it's just to note that Remembrance Week, and particularly Remembrance Day next Tuesday, November 11th, is a time to think about those who served their country, who put themselves in harm's way. And some came home, some didn't. I just ask that you think about that as this week goes forward. So now, having said that, I'd like to start. This is the story of Flight Sergeant Daniel Rycroft. And for those of you who are in the military, that was his registration number, which is very important. This is Danny as a young man, and this is the fellow that we're going to talk about. This would have been taken 1942 probably, and he's in his RCAF, Canadian Air Force uniform. So the story begins with the Rycroft family. The ancestor first came to Canada was Robert Henry and his wife Helen. And to this day, the Rycrofts cannot tell me quite why he did what he did, was to leave a paradise in the Pacific Ocean and come to northern Alberta. He came from Hawaii, where the family business, I understand, might have been plantations, growing stuff, kind of agricultural in nature. But he did, and he wound up in the Spirit River Prairie. Now that's the prairie around the current settlements of Rycroft and Spirit River. And back then it was just a community because the railroad hadn't arrived when the Rycroft family did, so there was a Spirit River community. I don't think there was a Rycroft. And they lived there for a while. They arrived, I'm not sure, mid-teens maybe?
11.
Okay, 11, yeah, 1911. So what happens is they're there, they start living their life, being agriculturalists, and in 1915, a railway comes through at the time it was called the Edmonton-Dunvegan in British Columbia. And they originally had planned to scoot through the Spirit River Prairie and go to Dawson Creek and just keep going. Because remember back in 1415, when the railway arrived in that country north of us, the society's goal was to get to the west coast because the society was agricultural. And what they wanted to do was move their products to the least distance to ships. But a bunch of merchants and farmers from the Grand Prairie, the place where we stand today, kind of pointed out that the big payloads, and that's how railways make their money, would occur better if they turned the track and instead of going straight, come through the prairie, make a big loop, Fecksmith, Grimshaw, Wembley, Hythe, not Grimshaw, sorry, that other town up there, Wembley. And eventually they'd get to Dawson Creek and that was fine, but in the meantime they would generate a lot of business. So they put a switch in about 5 miles east of Spirit River, and of course as soon as you put a switch in a railway, there's going to have to be a community there because it's going to be a divisional point. So they backed the train up literally from Spirit River to 5 miles east of it. They put a switch in. They needed a name for the community. So the history differs slightly. It was either 4 names or 6 of prominent families in the country, threw them in a hat, and they pulled the Rycroft names. Thus, the town of Rycroft got its name. So the Rycrofts stayed around Rycroft until about 1928. Danny, the subject of our story today, was born in 1923. But in 1928, his father and mom and whoever else made the decisions decided they'd be better off trying to get into the cattle business, and they wound up moving to Smoky Heights, which most of you know, of course, is east of TP Creek. And they moved actually to a place on the banks of the Big Smoky River which earned the name quite quickly, Rycroft Flats. And that's where Danny spent his childhood. He went to school there. And I want to stress one thing. He was very athletic from a very young age. And Greg's going to mention some jumping on stage. I'm not going to do that, so I'll leave that to you. But the whole point of you understanding that Danny Rycroft was very athletic will come when he gets to the things that he did in the war. So I'll leave it at that. Could I get the next slide, please? So Danny enlisted in World War II in 1942, just shortly after his 18th birthday. And the picture, and I hope you can see that, shows him with his mother and some aunts and some part of the Spry family, and he married the woman just behind the lady with the hat. She was Grandma Spry when he came back from the war. But this is Danny at this, and there's his mom. He's got his arm around her. And this can't be easy for her, for Helen, because her son is leaving. And if you look at that picture for just a second, this is a thing to look for in old pictures. What else do you actually see that might indicate, for instance, when he's going to get on the train? Do you see that the two women have their ears covered? So here's the deal. When you pull into a station with a train, the engineer's got to ring the bell, ding, 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 all the way through the siding, and he's got to give one long blast of his whistle as he comes to a stop or prepares to stop in front of the station. Well, the station you can see on the right-hand side is very close, and I think just out of the picture was a great big steam locomotive that was going to take Danny down to his training bases. So just something interesting. Next, please. Now, Danny joined into something that was called the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. Remember, he's in the RCAF, the Royal Canadian Air Force. And something that surprised me was the amount of time it took to get him out and over to England and into the actual active war. But as I read more about this British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, it becomes obvious why. They had bases in Calgary and Mossbank, Saskatchewan. They had them in Penhold, at Nanton, I think, in southern Alberta. They were scattered all over the countryside. And the idea was this. You notice the first training he took was in Calgary, and it's called a wireless air gunner. That's not a remote gun in an airplane. What that is he got trained as a wireless operator, a radio operator, and an air gunner. And the reason for that is once you are wheels up in any kind of plane, you're all by yourself. If anything happens, nobody's coming to help you. So if one of the crew members got injured, for instance, or somebody couldn't do something for some reason, other crew members have to take over that position because all of those things are required to be in the air. So his first thing was Calgary. He spent some months there. He goes to Mossbank, Saskatchewan, and he's given some more intensive training on being an aerial gunner. And then he eventually winds up in Saint-Joli in Quebec, and that's just downstream of the St. Lawrence from Quebec City, if you're interested, where he takes not only improving his air gunnery, but also learning how to run the bombing mechanisms, as in sights, dropping the bombs. Bombers, and I learned this, once you're into a bombing run, it's actually the bomber that drives the airplane, just so we can get it over the target properly. The pilot lets him do that. So at any rate, when Danny finishes that air training plan, he's very well qualified to do many different things in a bomber, and I think by then you realize that you know he's going to be in a bomber. And he heads off to England in, next slide please, 1943. So he's been almost a year in Canada, and he progressively trains, excuse me, oh, okay. Hello, hello. Didn't knock the plug out, did you? Oh, maybe there we got it. Okay, sorry. Where was I? He arrives in England, and then he progressively trains, because by then he knows he's going to be on the bomber. So they put him through training in England, not active yet, still training, through the Wellington, the Halifax bombers. And these are just smaller bombers than the one he's going to wind up on, which is a Lancaster. And he gets used to shooting out of an airplane, I would imagine, and understanding how you actually become part of a bomber crew. But he finishes up in the Lancaster bombers, and we'll talk about that for a minute. It's just interesting to understand the working conditions that Danny Rycroft had to put up with. And until May of 1944, he's training, and then he's assigned to an RAF, not RCAF. The flyers that went over from Canada in World War II were part of the Royal Air Force, the British Air Force. And they filled positions in every category. So he gets assigned to Squadron 101, which is a squadron of Lancaster bombers. And he's assigned to be the tail gunner. And it's a good fit because he's a smaller man, smaller than the mannequin, quite frankly. I think he was 5'7". He's not unusually small for that era. Many people were about that size, but because of the confines, and I'll show you some pictures of the places that the aircrew had to sit and do their things, if you were smaller, that was the first criteria actually for becoming the tail gunner. You had to fit in the turret. Everything else was just gravy. Oh, you can also shoot, and you can hit stuff, and you're agile, and you can move around, and you can watch for the enemy. Danny could do all of these things because of his athleticism. Yep. Sorry, I've got to hold this thing closer, I understand. So the Lancaster, the main job of Lancasters was to drop bombs on the enemy. But Danny's particular one, the role it had was radio jamming German military radio communications between the ground controllers and the night fighters. Because England, and I'll speak to that in a minute, but the British always bombed at night during Danny's tenure there, and there's a reason for it. I'll get to it in a minute. But I just wanted to point out that there's a jamming aerial hung below the nose, and there's two on the top of the fuselage. Do you see them? And do you see that little glass, or it was material called, we'd call it plexiglass, they called it perspex, but that's where he had to sit. He's a long way from anybody else. All the rest of the crew's up front. There's a tunnel going back to that. And once you get there, that's pretty much home till we get back to base. So that's what the plane looked like. In the next slide, now I'm going to get a little technical on you, but I know there's a couple of pilots in the audience. This was the bomber. This is the big, heavy bomber. This is the one that's going to pack the most load. It has four Rolls-Royce Merlin V12 engines, and it'll produce 6,500 horsepower. If you think about that, your car might have 3 or 4 if you're really lucky. This is a big machine and very powerful. Had 7 to 8 crew members, and at 20,000 feet, it was often 40 below, and some guys would wear heated suits. The big thing, though, is that second from the last, they worked in very small, confined spaces. You build an airplane that's going to war, you don't waste a lot of time on creature comforts. So you're stuffed into a turret. You're stuffed into, you're running the radio system, but you're like this. So it was uncomfortable, and you had to be athletic and physically fit to be able to just stand that for 12 hours or however long they were in the air. So they were pretty amazing machines for their time. So the missions, and this is where we're going to go next, Danny starts to go on missions where it's actually, they're jamming radio signals as part of the war effort. And I just mentioned the bomber strategy. The British flew in the daytime for 1 or 2 missions and then quickly realized we're just going to lose a whole bunch of equipment and crew. So they went to night missions, and bombing in the dark is safer because the fighter planes have a hard time finding you, but it's also less accurate. You just can't see what you're doing. So you navigate, try and pinpoint exactly where you are, and then you start your bombing run. And, you know, I imagine most times it worked, but sometimes it doesn't. You're off by a country mile. The Americans, when they first came over, they had something called a Norden bomb site. It was a very, oh, I am sorry. There we go, I'm sorry. They had a Norden bomb site that was very accurate. It measured the wind speed and the plane speed and the this and the that and the air density. But it wouldn't work unless the bomber could actually see what he was targeting. So they, unlike the British, bombed in the daylight. And that was the strategies, if you will. Brits at night and Americans in the daytime. Danny's first mission happened over France the night of June 5th, 6th. Who in this audience knows the significance of that day? Say it out loud. D-Day. D-Day, that's exactly right. On the morning of June 6th, the invasion of Normandy started by the Allies. So our Danny, he's right in the middle of it. In fact, he was just ahead of it. And the radio jamming, I suspect, would have been to try and stop German aircraft from getting in the way, learning something, who knows what. But he was there. The next month and a half, up until August, mid-August, Danny flew 24 more missions. He has put his story, at the insistence, I think, of some of the people that might be in this room, into the Grand Prairie archives, which are found in the Center 2000, just upstream the Bear Creek here. And when you read that story, his notes are pretty sparse. In fact, all he said about the next 24 missions, the details in a logbook, but we don't really want you opening it, it's very frail. But his whole take on the thing was, well, you know, some were pretty hairy. Others were softer, and that's all he said. And yet we know that his squadron was taking severe losses. And Danny, I've been told one of his sons that you never wanted to make friends because you'd lose them so fast. It just wasn't worth the despair. So anyway, he proceeds, and now we come to what I call his final mission, just because he never went on another mission after this. Maybe some of you have watched war movies or read books, and the qualification 25 missions will be mentioned. You flew 25 missions, and then you were either out or you had a long break before you re-volunteered again. The Brits weren't like that. It was 30 missions. So when Dan headed off, he still had 5 to do, I guess. And that night, it's always night and it's always dark. And this is going to play into part of this story. Remember, this is all happening in the middle of the night. So they flew into Germany, which was a long flight. They were normally mostly working around France and Belgium, but now we've got to hit a target. It was an Opel factory that made motors and a rail yard. That's what they were after that day. So they flew into Germany, and as they're coming back, they get hit by ground fire, by flak guns is what they were called. The first one, well, I'll get into that in a sec, but the one thing that Danny wrote in his story was he thought later that perhaps they'd bought it on themselves because the guy that was running the jamming radio, and I I should have talked about that a minute, had broadcast a little too long, and the Germans on the anti-aircraft guns figured out where he was and shot. And I'll stop right there because I got to go back and explain how this jamming worked. The crew had an extra crew member whose sole job was to run the jamming process. He was fluent in German, and he was an expert at twisting those old radio dials and finding the frequencies which the ground control from Germany, or the Germans on the ground, were speaking to the night fighter pilots, okay? And it's like, okay, we've got a target and we know that, and there they are, and you go to these coordinates and you'll find them and you can shoot them down. So jamming was a way to just save lives and bomber crew and machinery. And the way they did it, they'd find the frequency where they heard German being spoken between the two parties, and then they would just jam it with a sound. I read one article where the Lancasters with 4 Merlin engines are quite noisy, as you can imagine. And all he would do is hold his microphone up like this, with no earmuffs, of course, and that was just enough sound to drown out the signal. So the fighter pilots, I imagine, would just get annoyed and say, well, we're on our own. But the other thing they could do is if they thought they could influence the position of the fighters, this guy running the jamming system was fluent, absolutely fluent in German. And he would talk them away from the bomber squadron. He would say, no, we've just discovered that they're over there. You guys go over there. And meanwhile, the bombers are doing their thing. All the bombers, all airplanes in wars tend to jog and jig and trying to, fool the opposition. And I think part of the other reason that they might have been hit was they're on their way home and they may not have been expecting it, so they're flying a straight line. And you'll see this on the next slide, I think it is. This is the map. So I'm just going to put this down, because I'd like to point this out, so I'll speak up a little bit. They left their bomber in Lincolnshire in England. They fly, this is where the 101 squadron was placed. They fly over the English Channel into Normandy. They turn and go east into Germany to a place called Rüsselsheim, near Frankfurt. They do their business, and then they come back, and remember, he's jamming. All the rest of his squadron have got bombs, and they're bombing railway yards and this factory that I spoke of. They come back into France, and this is where they get hit. It's a little town called Bois. Now, Bois means forest in French. I'm sure some of you know that. The name of the town was Bolt. I was unable to find out what that meant, but that's where they were close to. So, you could get up to the next slide, please. Yeah. So, they get hit twice. The first one doesn't do that much damage. It almost looks like, okay, we're good. The next one literally starts the entire plane on fire, the second shot from the anti-aircraft guns. And it happens so fast that the intercom system, which the pilot uses to communicate with the crew, because remember, Danny's a long way down a tunnel, the rest of the guys are up front, but you can't holler at anybody in that noisy airplane, so they've all got radio communication. And the fire starts so fast that the pilot's command is, abandon the word ship doesn't even get out of his mouth. Danny, it's lost. The wires are burnt off or been ripped away, and there's no more communication. So Danny's kind of knows he's in trouble, and he looks down at his feet and he sees there's flames somewhere around his boots. You really can't, he's crowded into this turret. But what he does, it's so small he couldn't put his chute on when he's flying. So his chute is back here on a hook on the fuselage. And he moves back and he grabs his chute just about the time his plane starts to go into a dive. And if you have ever ridden, let's say, with a teenage boy in a muscle car who's a speed demon, you know what G-forces are? Gravitational forces, those things that press you way back in your chair and you can't move until he takes his foot off the pedal. And then, if you're mum, you give him hell. But, so anyway, I'm going to keep going here. I don't know what's going on. But what happens, and the guy that taught me this is in the room, a pilot, an airplane, despite what you might think, is actually quite a stable piece of machinery. And what an airplane is designed to do is if the pilot's not telling it to rise up, dive down, turn sideways, whatever, it seeks to become level and to kind of fly in a straight line. And this is what happens. Danny's dive stops and slowly levels out, and then for whatever reason, and I know the reason, it has to do with the way the wind goes over the wings, he starts to rise. And when an airplane rises with not very efficient motors anywhere, they're on fire, you lose speed. The G-forces disappear, and now he can move. Grabs his chute, buckles it on, goes back to the turret, because he knows he can't get out the other way. The other way is an escape door, but it's already behind the flames. He comes back into this tail gunnery, and what would you do? Well, he's got very few seconds to decide. So what he does, he takes, and I think it's here somewhere, the pilot chute. When you pack a parachute, you put the main chute in, but then you have to have some mechanism to pull it out of the bag that's on your back. So you have a piece of cloth, and you can see it later. It's only this big, but it's attached to the top of the main chute, and it will yank out the main. Danny takes the pilot chute, and it's not the pilot's, it's a pilot chute, and he throws it out the gap where the guns are. It grabs the air, it does its job. It sucks the main chute right out of the bag, and guess what? It's attached to Danny, and bang, Danny goes out the plexiglass. That's how he got out of the airplane, out of that very crowded, full of guns and ammunition, tail turret. So when he comes to, he's under his main chute. Things are not that bad. He said it was kind of twirling a bit, but not so bad that he couldn't pull a few shrouds and straighten it out. And down he goes. And while he's going down, he sees a huge flame just over there, in fact, where his bomber has crashed. Okay, and we'll show you a picture of that in a while. But he floats down, and eventually he stops, but he's above the ground. What's happened? His chute has got caught in a tree, quite a large tree. In fact, he estimated later it might have been as high as 100 feet. Now, he's not 100 feet off the ground, of course, because he's hanging from his chute, so he's midway down the tree. But Danny, being the athlete, and finally kind of waking up and being a little more aware of what's going on, he looks down at the ground. Is this going to work? Okay, I'm sorry. He looks down at the ground, and he sees a shadow, which he thinks is the ground, and he estimates, well, heck, that's only 10 feet. I've done that lots of times. Probably jumping off the barn at home. I don't know, but anyway. So he unclips himself, and he falls about 55 feet. Because what he was looking at was the underbrush that's come up under the bigger trees, and he's fallen through all of them, and he lands on the ground, and he fractures 2 vertebrae, and 2 of his ribs pull away from his backbone. And he passes out. And he lays there under that tree for a while, and then he comes around, and he is in incredible pain. Just I think he might have even said childbirth, just, as an example. But it was very serious.
Like a man.
And so he kind of gathers his thoughts, and he's thinking, and he's worried. Two things. He knows that he is behind enemy lines. And I forgot another thing. This is the night of August 25th, 26th. Do you know anything else important about August 25th? Sorry?
I said I'm thinking.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you just to move on. 25th of August, 1944 was when the Americans liberated Paris. Right? It's a big deal. They went to Paris. The Canadians are on their way to Holland. And that relationship still exists. So he knows he's behind enemy lines because I don't even know if Danny knew where the Americans actually were. And so the German patrols are going to be an issue because if they find him, he's either a prisoner of war or he's shot. The more immediate thing was that he hears a herd of pigs wandering around the bush looking for supper. And Danny knows what pigs sound like because he grew up on a farm. But these are feral pigs, and they will attack. And I think he knew it. So he's trying to be quiet, but he knows he's got to get out of there because eventually something's going to discover him. So he tried crawling, but that was going to be very slow, and it just hurt. Oh, man, did that hurt. So he slowly finds himself a stick in one hand and a tree in the other, and he pulls himself upright, and here he is, shuffling along. And I think it took him, he wrote it down and I forget, but it was like 500 yards in 3 hours, something like that. Can you imagine? And again, it's dark and it's scary, and there's a rustle of who knows what behind him. But anyway, he has hit the ground, got himself up, and he's moving, so he's looking to find help. Sometime that morning, and this is the morning of the 26th, he comes out to an opening, and there's some water, which he has some issues getting there, because he has to deal, for instance, with World War I trenches. They're still in the landscape. And you can't get around them because so he walks down and he shuffles up, and then there's muskegs and ponds and various things. But eventually he comes out and he sees a patch of water, and he sees some young French teenagers swimming in it. By now it's well up. The sun is well up. So he decides, well, what else am I going to do? I'm going to approach them and hope that they're French. And he's just about there, and he falls in a shell hole. And, of course, he falls, and he screams, and the French teenagers come running over, and they're standing, and he passes out. When Danny wakes up again, here's these bunch of kids standing there looking at him. So he said, do any of you speak French? Not English, but French. And they all look at him and said, oui, yeah. So he takes a chance. He pulls his jacket back and he shows them the Canadian insignia so they know that he's one of the Allies. And they get teenagery, I guess. They get quite excited. And they say, we have to rescue him. So they grab him, one on each arm, and they start dragging him. And the pain just gets worse, and he starts to scream. So they drop him, and smart kids, though, they gag him. Okay? So that he can't scream anymore. And they drag him, and then they also get a couple of guys under his arms and take a lot of the weight off. And they take him to a place, it's a bit of a camp, which I didn't quite understand where it was, but it was a place where adult French resistance fighters hung out. And they take one look at this guy and say, right, we've got you. And they take him, I think we can go up to the next, yeah. They take him and deliver him to a house in Bourg-à-Bois to the family of Robert and Germaine Bouquet. He is delivered by the French resistance, and they are also French resistance. So they take him in, and they hide him in a room in the second story of their house. And you'll see a picture of their house later. But these are the Bouquets. This is after Danny has recuperated somewhat and the Germans have left. So this is a picture jumping ahead a bit. But he spends 30 days in that house, 12 of them hiding, because the Germans are being chased by the Americans, and there's constant battle, for position. It's not like the Germans are running. They're fighting as they go. They're shooting backwards, and the Americans are shooting forwards, basically. So for 12 days, this retreat of the Germans is still going on. So Danny could sometimes crack the window crack the window a slight bit and look down, and you would see transport trucks all the way down to ox carts. That's what the Germans were evacuating their equipment, what little food they had, and the soldiers. So he pretty much had to be quiet, and he had to put up with this confinement. The resistance would come every so often and talk to him about things. And one of the first things they asked was that he give them his dog tags and his uniform. Because if either of those were discovered anywhere near this house, that would mean the instant death of the Bouquets, Robert and Germaine. That was the penalty for hiding an enemy, as far as the Germans were concerned. The other thing that happened, though, was that both the Bouquets and Danny, they're in a pretty intimate relationship. She is feeding him, and he's worried about being discovered and have them being punished. And one of the things that the French resistance interpreters finally got through, Danny would not accept Germaine's food. And the reason is he thought he was stealing their food. Like, you need to eat. I'm young and, I'll get by, but this is all you've got, he thought. So one day there's a translator, and they're talking about the situation. They know where the Americans are and how many troops are probably left to come by the house from the German side. And then one of the questions to Danny is, and why aren't you eating Germaine's meals? She's quite upset. And Danny says, well, I don't want to take their food. And they start to laugh. What did you think she was feeding you? Well, it was chicken and vegetables. And they said, no, it's rabbit and vegetables. There's thousands of rabbits in the bush, and she grows a big garden. They're not going to run out of food. So Danny started to eat, and I think it's a darn good thing that they told him that, because all of you in this room probably have looked at your grandmother or your mother, and you don't want to eat this food, but you notice that 1,000-yard stare that came across her face. It's like, kid, if you don't eat this. It's human, and there's humans. This is all a common human thing. So anyway, so they both quit worrying to some extent and actually became quite close. In fact, towards the end, the Bouquet, Robert and Germaine, asked Danny if he wouldn't stay with them. If he actually wouldn't become their adoptive son, because at the time they did not have children. They had a son later. But it got that tight. Germaine just got to have somebody to mother, and Robert's, stay in France. But Danny, that's not going to happen. So meanwhile, back at the Smoky Heights and Sexsmith country, this is August the 28th. So we've gone by the August the 28th, but this written out from a telegram arrives in Teepee Creek, and I assume by telephone it says. I don't know who had a telephone in 1944, so I can guess maybe it was the store or some prominent person. And it reads, regret to advise you that your son, Flight Sergeant Daniel Franklin Rycroft, is reported missing after air operations overseas. August 26, letter follows, signed RCAF Casualty Officer. So this is in August, and the months are going to go by with his family worrying. Okay? We'll go ahead. So 2 other things happened. During the 12-day period out of the 30 that Danny stayed in that house, the French, the Germans had picked up some remains out of the plane. Most of the bodies were burnt. This is Danny's crew mates. And started to bury them, and then realized we got to get out of Dodge. We're leaving. So, French people, you look after these guys, which they willingly did. But they have a tradition in France that you shouldn't bury people unless there's a friend or a relative at the funeral service. So they dressed Danny up as a French farmer, and he's a bit shorter, and they found 6 of the tallest Frenchmen, and they surrounded him, they shielded him, and they took him to the service. And it was going along quite well. I mean, it's a solemn occasion. You're saying goodbye to 7 people under those crosses. And one other guy, I should mention, of the crew, there was 2 that actually survived. Danny and another guy, but he was caught almost immediately by a German patrol after he landed with his chute. And he's never mentioned again, so I'm not sure. But Danny, Greg may have something to say about that. So they're at the funeral service. At one point they hear German patrol, and the priest had forewarned the congregation, and all of them, the patrols on the main road, they all turn in unison, and they just stare at this German patrol. And it's obviously they're at a funeral. It's a religious thing. The Germans are like, oh, we should leave these family alone. So they just carry on. And that was really the only tense part of the service itself. They got him back into the house, and he finishes his 12-day stint, and by then, the Germans, and they know this now, the Germans are gone. The last one is past the house. You can't really celebrate until the Americans show up, just because as a safety, but they know they're pretty much out of trouble. So at that point, Dan asked if he could be escorted to this crash site. He just wants, and that bottom shot, and it's very fuzzy, I'm sorry about the quality, but he does make it to the crash site and poke around a bit, and yeah, well, he goes from there. So, 30 days pass by. The last 18, he's still recuperating enough so he can travel, and he goes to the crash site and gets out of the house to take that picture that I showed you where there's Robert and Danny and Germaine outside the house. I don't know if you noticed, but he's standing like this. And that's how he supports himself. Okay, he's got one leg up against the wall. So he says goodbye on August 26th. There's a bit of tears, I think. 1944, sorry, on August. No, that's wrong. It's September 26th. I'm sorry. I was revising. I'll blame it on spell check. And says goodbye, and by now the Americans are in the town. They've already given the French resistance arms and munitions to carry on their work should it ever be needed. And he gets transported by the Americans to the French coast, and then he goes off to England. The only thing is, once he hits the French coast, nobody wants to take responsibility for him. It's like, no. So, at any rate, somebody in the American camp tells him that there's a Lancaster Bomber over here, and we know there's a British crew coming to pick it up. So, and I think it's 3 days pass by. So Danny, being ever the survivor, goes to the canteen of the American camp and eats very well, and then goes out and sleeps against the wheel of the Lancaster Bomber so it can't get away on him. 3 days later, sure enough, the crew shows up. The pilot, the guy in charge, says, we can't let you on this, you got no chute. at which point Danny kind of explains to him his situation and what he's gone through to get here, and be damned if he's not getting on this airplane, buddy. So, you know, that's just... and the pilot finally says, all right, get on, and I promise I won't ask you to jump, as in I won't crash the airplane. So they fly. Danny eventually gets to his squadron, which is in Lincolnshire, North England. And he's then transported to an infirmary, and he recuperates from probably early October to February of 1945, and when he's invalided out. And for those of you in the military, that is different, I believe, than being demobilized. That was the word I wanted to use, but Wanda pointed out that there's a different word for that. At any rate, he got home. And the next slide is the one that creates some happiness. This one, Northern Alberta Railways Telegraphs, to R.H. Rycroft, Sexsmith, Alberta. And this is because Danny's parents by then have moved to Sexsmith. I think that's the way it worked. 1944? At any rate, the telegrapher, the station is in Sexsmith. That's where the message would arrive. It's from Ottawa, Ontario. It says, R.H. Rycroft, Sexsmith, pleased to advise you that your son, Flight Sergeant Daniel Franklin Rycroft, previously reported missing, arrived safely in the United Kingdom, September 24th, stop. Oh, I was off on my dates. Letter to follow, same guy, RCAF Casualties Officer. So things are happy on the home front from that date forward, and Danny is home, and there's another telegram which I didn't, but somewhere after Canada, his mother receives another one, because by now, his dad had passed away when Dan was overseas. And you might hear more about that. But so I think the Rycroft family elders are living in Sexsmith now. The next one is, this is an interesting thing. It's a bit of an aside from this story because Danny never got to use it. But this is a picture of a silk scarf, of the silk scarf that Danny had probably hidden in the heel of his shoe. And these were given to all airmen. And there's one hanging on the mannequin that you can look at during break or afterwards. Ron will show you that. It's a silk scarf imprinted with a map of Europe, France, Germany, the Low Country, so that if you came out of an airplane in good shape and landed and were able to be mobile enough to escape, which Danny wasn't, you had a map that didn't mold, it didn't crinkle at night when you were trying to find your way and there was a German patrol right next door. No noise, quiet. You could hide it in your shoe, and very useful for getting out of Europe, quite frankly. And all airmen were given one of these things. There was, probably like today, in both wars, I know, because I've read a bit of history, there were people that we would call nerds today, who sat in the back rooms and thought up this kind of stuff. Survival gear. What could I do to help this guy who's in so much trouble? Well, let's invent this or that or the next thing. Concentrated food, maps on silk. It was endless. Okay, so there's more, and I'll tell you what's going to happen next, and then I invite you to stand up, stretch, move around, pick yourself up a snack. We'd like to start again in, about 15 minutes, if you wouldn't mind. And what will happen next is Greg Rycroft, one of Danny's sons, will get up and give you a bit of a story. And then a niece? Okay. Grandson and company give you some more stuff. And by then we'll get on to what's on these tables. So please, at least stand up, get the blood flowing. I just want to introduce one of your own now, Greg Rycroft, and he's going to take, along with some family members, the back half of this presentation. So, looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Just for your information, the uniform, I'm the Sergeant at Arms in the Manning Legion, so I don't have any service record. I'd like to start with a little bit on Dad when he come back in 1945. He married Violet Rycroft that May and started to produce 6 lovely children. Yeah. Dad worked as a grain buyer and in real estate, and he also worked for the county of Grand Prairie. When he worked for the Grand Prairie County, he was a flagman when they were building the road down to the first pulp mill. And he was of the opinion that maybe these chip trucks that were going through there were failing to slow down. So he used his aimers training and put his water bottle through the windshield of one of those. The RCMP did give him his water bottle back, and the trucks did slow down also. Yeah. And then he worked for the RCMP as a guard. And the guard job worked quite well with him. It was shift work, and he was able to hone his skills at the golf course. Sometimes Mum would meet him at the curb after shift, give him a sandwich so he wouldn't miss his tea time. So, he became a better than average golfer. He also took up curling, baseball, and golf. We believe Dad used these sports to help deal with his PTSD. Dad went back to France in 1986, and the trip was quite an endeavor as he wasn't really a world-class traveler. He did tell me about the time he got into Paris, and he was looking for the right connection to get to Reims, which would be close to the end of his trip. After many attempts to get somebody to give him the directions to the train to get on, and getting the answer, no speak of the English, he said to one guy, "You're a damn liar. You were happy to see me 50 years ago." And the guy said, "Take that train over there." He had a tendency to operate like that. Okay. Dad spent many hours volunteering in the healthcare field, driving patients to and from appointments, as well as locum doctors to and from the airport. He had told me once that he was driving a couple of young doctors to the airport and telling them stories about his war experiences. And one of them looked at him, "How old are you? Are you 85? "No, I'm older than that." So he was pretty, I would say, in good shape for a fella his age. Yeah. Okay. At this present time, Kevin Rycroft, who is our go-to researcher, called me about a month ago and said that Dad was probably in line with for another medal. And just Wednesday, I got a text from him saying that Dad did qualify for it and the application is done. Another little oddity is when in Pat's program talked about the 24th, after the 24th trip. Well, Dad had found a 4-leaf clover when he was training in Quebec. He put it in his wallet. And after the 25th trip, he sent it back to Mom in the mail, and he was shot down on the 26th. So you just never know. Yeah. Dad was released from the forces, given a pension of $2 a month, and told him not to work for 2 years. Well, that didn't work. So, anyway. And in Dad's book, he talked about an impactful point in his life. This happened to be in the wee hours of the morning. He was visited by 4 people: Jack Porter, his pilot; Will Nesbitt, his wireless operator; Pop Powell, the mid-upper gunner; and John Kinsley, the engineer. Although the room was pitch black, he could see them as clear as day. Jack did most of the talking and let Dad know that they were all right, but David, the navigator, was still in the plane. There was some movement outside the door, and the 4 men just moved to the wall and walked through it, after telling Dad to find David before he left. Robert and 2 friends were at the door and were puzzled that Dad was alone, and they heard voices. They drew a picture of the plane and showed Dad that where the body was located, and Dad made a mark on the plane showing them where the body of David was located. He was located and buried after with the other 6 members. Robert and his friends wondered how Dad knew this information, but it seemed to coincide 5 months earlier than that. Dad was visited by his dad. They chatted about many things, and his dad just smiled, said he had to go, and walked off into the darkness. His dad had suffered a number of strokes and was unable to speak properly for quite some time. Dad told his crew members about the experience and later found that it was the exact time that his dad had passed away. The strange things about both experiences was that all the people who visited him acted like things were just fine. So this affected Dad quite a bit, and he did spend a lot of time attending church and playing the organ at church. But I'd like to now call up Jen and Dean, who have spent many hours in France. And one of the experiences was they were in France when there was celebrating in May the VE Day, which is a victory in Europe. And I'd like them to tell you some of their experiences, how the people in France included them, honored them, and actually, my words aren't enough. Jen told us last night, and I was just flabbergasted. So, Jen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And it's my bad because I arrived home a little late, and Uncle Greg and Auntie Nancy are staying at the house, and they had all decided that I was volunteered to do the speaking before I even got home. So, but then we were talking, and when I had shared a couple of things, Greg had said, that's what I want you to talk about. So I just wanted to start off. This is my husband, Dean Treadle, and he is Danny's oldest grandson. So he is the son of Lorraine Treadle, who is Danny's oldest child. We, years ago, hatched out a plan. It was probably 2006, 2007, I think, when we went over there. We decided we were going to go and visit with the son and granddaughter of the Bocats. The Bocats had passed away, and Dean's mom, Lorraine, also decided to come on the trip, as well as his cousin Danielle, who goes by the name of Danny, named after Danny So the four of us decided we were going to go. 3 to 6 months before, I'm not sure the date, we decided to write a letter, because back then that's how we corresponded with the family. So we wrote a letter and we mailed it, and it was about the exact same date that in France, in France, they wrote a letter inviting us. And we had asked to come at the beginning of May, and they invited us to come for May 8th for this VE Day, to invite us. So out of all of the cemeteries in France where Canadian soldiers were buried, somebody had written a book about it and talked about it. They had chosen the Bois Cemetery to honor. And that's where Grandpa's friends were buried. So yes, of course we're gonna go, right? We've already asked. So Grandpa decided at that point he was too old. He said, I've done my travel, but please represent the family. And let me tell you, we were treated so as the most honored guests. We were late, they waited for us. There was a whole parade. We were made to walk up in the front. Dean's mom, Lorraine, was famous. They had the booklets and everybody wanted her autograph. So for those of you who know Lorraine, she was, oh my goodness, what do I write? But it was absolutely wonderful. They had a ceremony. We were all made to stand. I tried to bow out. I'm like, I'm just married in, but no, they made me go too. And we all stood up in behind the graves, and they had been practicing, the community, and there was local politicians and everybody there. It was amazing. They'd been practicing before we got there. They sang "Au Canada en français" in French to us all while they held the flags. And it just an amazing experience. And we have since been back many, many times, and with our girls as well. I can't look at my daughter, I'm going to start. Oh, okay, so in 2023, so just 2 years ago, we went back, and again, they had an amazing, amazing celebration planned because we were there. And it always makes us feel very humble because we're there to celebrate them. They are the heroes, right? They're the ones who's made it possible for my husband to be here, my girls to be here, right? So it's just very powerful to see how much they honor us. And I mean, all over Europe, you'll see cemeteries. They're always in the most beautiful spots, the nicest views, so taken care of. They are so honored to have all the fallen soldiers resting there. So we went this time. Again, it was a group, a very large group, and yeah, Uncle Greg was talking about likely so many of them, and we know that because we meet after, and they have like a gathering after. Some of them were children then that we've met over the years. All our relatives. The story of this is vast, right? The 7 fallen crewmen from the Lancaster, they are in this little Boltabois community of just over 100 people. It is a tiny village. They are front row and center in the middle of this cemetery in the biggest place of honor. The bouquets are buried just beside them, overlooking. Okay, sorry. So anyways, this last ceremony, we go and yeah, they had, the professional flag bearers. There was senators there. This is big to them. So we are there, and they do the ceremony. We're standing up front again with everybody. Again, I tried to get out of there, but no, they're not having any of that. And then they got into a part this time that was really, really personal. They had done a lot of research, very similar to something that's happening here. And they had information on every single person in that Lancaster that day. including Danny, and the one man who was taken prisoner of war. They did his life story as well. He did survive. Danny, with his injuries, they would not have taken him as a prisoner of war. And then the 7 crewmen. And for the 7 airmen that were buried there, it was so powerful. They would do the speech, and then they would do like the music and the flag thing, and then they had a man, and he would come up, and he went, "Il mort pour France!" And the first one, I was a little, what's happening? By about the second or third, we realized, "Il mort pour France!" He died for France. So, I mean, we were crying. It was like very, very powerful. So that's the story that I was telling Greg and Nancy last night, and I always get a little emotional. I'm like, please don't make me come up here and tell this story. He's like, no, this is the story you're telling, and you have to tell it. It's important. So, and I know that Dean's grandpa would also go and speak at Remembrance Day ceremonies for Emma, our niece. And I know that he, in his later years, he talked about it. I know he didn't for many years. And he talked about forgiveness, and he talked about seeing the soldiers begging for food, and they were just young men like himself, the Germans, when the lines were changing back and forth there for a little bit. And he always talked about forgiveness, too. He was a pretty amazing, amazing man, and anybody who knows him knows that. And I think I'm just going to end and say the story of Germaine and him not eating her food is still famous. She was mad that he would not eat her cooking. So I'm going to end on a positive note and pass the mic back.
Thank you, Jen. Is this on? No. But I think it's a good time to bring it to the end now. I don't know what else we can do. We can thank Pat and Wanda for helping put this show on. And thank you for choosing Dad as the subject. And thank you, Dad. Yes.
I've got some acknowledgements to make. You done?
Yeah.
Charles, can you kick up the last slide, please? Yeah, it's been an amazing afternoon. I still surprised at how many of you came. I wanted to end by acknowledging people that helped us put this together. The South Peace Regional Archives, Photos and Fawns, and that's their word for records, and Danny's book, as they call it, is in there. Were generous enough to give us photos for free and open up the vault so that Wanda and I in particular, and Danny to some extent, could actually read all this stuff and find out what he'd written. And there's a message that I always want to give to people being interested in history myself. If you have family records or you wish to create some, it's almost too late for the veterans. In fact, it's probably past by now. But, thank goodness that Danny, and I think the women of the Rycroft family were the ones that insisted, write this down, and we're taking it to the archives. And I don't know how many times I tell people that, but if it's true, if you have a good story of the peace country, take it. It's just down the road in Center 2000. They're nice people. So that's my first request. I'd also like to thank Wanda Zenner. Wanda actually brought the story forward to me. I'm not sure where I was in the group, but thought that we should get together at A&W, which we did. Danny and Nancy drove down from Manning one day, and we chatted and said, yeah, you know what, we can do it. And it'll kind of look like what you just saw. in the last few hours. I want to thank Greg and Nancy and Scott. Is Scott here? There you are. Yes, I saw you. They came back a second time, and we sort of sorted through how things might float. So, because this does take a bit of organizing. It's particular thanks to Charles Taws and his staff who set up all these chairs, made these appliances available to us, and we'll fix them in the future, I'm sure. And probably a last one is wanted to acknowledge the support and the collaboration of the Grand Prairie and District branch of the Alberta Genealogical Society. There's one member here, well, there's several members, but I'll point out Maxine Maxwell, who's one of the energy points in that organization. And we actually have the past president of the Alberta branch in the back row there too, I see. We collaborate quite well because family history, Peace Country history, there's a lot of connections. So we often collaborate. This time around, I have to thank Maxine and this group for providing all the refreshments. So that would be good. Okay, before I let you go, I have one more thing to do. And this is to present this to Greg. I knew I was going to do that. A document. It's from the Chris Workington, the Member of Parliament for Grand Prairie. It's dated November 8th, 2025, and it says this, and Greg can share it with the rest of the family. As a Member of Parliament for Grand Prairie, it is my privilege to honor, to remember Sergeant Rycroft for his dedication and service to our nation. His commitment to our country's freedom stands as a true testament to bravery and deserves our deepest respects. Signed, Chris Workington. So, and with that, I'd invite you to finish off, if there is anything left, come up here and have a look at these shadow boxes. This one, for instance, has the little pilot chute I talked about. This is actually it. And there's Danny's medals. Perhaps the Rycroft family stick around long enough if you're interested to learn what they meant. And I can give the last word to Greg, and we're done.
Thank you. Over the years, my name has been Greg, Daniel Gregory Rycroft. And after I got my passport, of course, I'm Daniel. And in the health system, I'm Daniel. So people ask me now, how come you weren't Daniel? And I say proudly, my dad was Danny. Right. So that's it. Thank you guys very much.